In this video, I'm very excited to give you some free plugin news. Let's dive in. Hi folks, I'm Mike and I hope you're well. I've got some free plugins to tell you about in this episode, including some really nice reverb, some classic compression and EQ, and some great sound libraries as well. Stick around for all of that. I'm going to be leaving my favorite until last. Let's dive in with the first one. So what we're looking at on the screen is the VREV-666 Vintage Spring Reverb from Fuse Audio Labs. Really easy to use with just a few controls, and I have it applied to a piano track at the moment. Now before I play the track with the reverb added to it, let's just have a listen to it dry. So we'll go ahead and we'll switch on, and I'm just going to run through these four basic controls that we have here. The first one is a limiter. Okay, so as we push this up, it's going to apply some limiting to the incoming signal. This is really handy to control the peaks in the incoming signal, which can sometimes sort of over trigger a reverb, and they can really be accentuated and stand out too much. So that's really quite handy. You'll see as I push it up and I play the track in just a moment that this gain reduction light starts to show you that there is indeed some limiting happening. So let's start off down the bottom and I'll push it up as we play the track. Moving on from the limiter there, we of course have a mix control. I guess we all know what this does, but it mixes the dry and the wet signal. Just as a little tip, I've got this as an insert on my channel, okay? So I'll definitely use this as a mix control between the dry and the wet signal. If you happen to put things like reverbs on a bus, so you've got the effects separated from the original channel, then you almost always want to put this up full, okay? So you get the full effect of the plugin, and then you will use the faders in your DAW to blend the two together. But in this case, it's an insert on the channel, so I'm blending it here, and I reckon around about here is good, but I'll just put it all the way up to the top so that you can hear the full effect of the reverb without the dry signal. When you listen like that, then you can definitely hear that little bit of grunginess in there, which may be what you're looking for. I'll put it back down here, which is around about where I think it's going to sound good. I'll just check that. Yeah, that's fine. Now moving on, we have a tone control down here. This is what they call a tilt style EQ. Okay, so when you have this all the way down the bottom, then it's lifting the low end, but it's also reducing the high end, okay? Now, when you do it all the way up to the top, the opposite happens. The high end is being increased while the low end is being reduced, okay? This can be quite handy because there's a tendency with reverb sometimes, especially when you've got a signal like this with lots of low end in that piano there, for things to get a bit muddy, okay? So I find it particularly handy a lot of the time to focus on the high ends with the reverb. Of course, it depends what you want in your particular production, but 9 times out of 10, that's where I'll be going. So I will tend to be putting this up high. I'll just demonstrate it quickly just so you can hear the difference. Put the mix up a bit. Subtle, but it's there and very, very useful. I'll pump that up to around about there. And the last control we have here is pre-delay. Very, very handy. So essentially, this is creating a gap in time between the source and the beginning of the reverb effect. Okay, very, very handy feature to have to create, again, a little bit of separation between the original source and the reverb, because things can get a bit muddled up when you're using reverb. So I'll just push this up gradually as we play the piano. So that's the 4 controls, a very easy to use plugin and a handy one to have in your arsenal if you want a vintage sounding spring reverb. Oh, by the way, I forgot to ask you at the beginning, would you like to see this kind of episode be a regular feature on the channel? A kind of a news roundup of free plugins, free libraries, anything free related to music production. If you would like this to be a regular feature, let me know in the comments down below right away. And then I'll make sure I try and hunt these types of things down and let you guys know about them. The other way you can let me know that you would like to see future episodes like this is by hitting the like button right away. And of course, if you don't want to miss those episodes and you haven't done so already, please make sure you subscribe and ring the bell so that you get notified about my future videos. Now, back to this video. So I'm in danger of getting hit hard in the comments for this next one because it's neither technically a plugin nor is it new news for you. But I saw this recently on Sanjay C's channel, love that guy's work, and I just wanted to make sure that you guys do know about it. This is the free Production Loops 2020 from Heavyocity. I love Heavyocity stuff, really great when you want some big cinematic kinds of sounds. Now, you're seeing it here as a Contact plugin, and if you do use it as a Contact plugin, then you do need the full version of Contact, okay? However, in the download, you also get the waves of these loops, okay? So you can use them in any DAW. You can, stretch them, shrink them, whatever you want to do with them, okay? So this is available to everyone, even if you don't have Contact, but there are a couple of advantages of using it within Contact, which we'll look at in a moment. But first of all, let's listen to it. This is a sort of a sound that I definitely always associate with Heavyocity. Have a listen. I just love that big, huge sub-bass kind of sound that you get there. Other variations of loops are much more complex than that, though. Let's have a listen. Great stuff. Inspiring. I want to make music. Okay, so what are the advantages of using this in Contact as I have it here? Well, first of all, it's going to change the speed of the loops according to the tempo that's set in your DAW. Okay, so it's synced to your DAW. Of course, if you use just the WAV files, you can in most DAWs now stretch them to your tempo, but it's very, very handy just to have them available on the keyboard here. You can play them, easily mix them up, and then of course adjust the tempo easily as well. The other thing which is an advantage of having this in Contact is of course these two controls here, the punch and the space control. So I'll just let you hear the difference with punch off, and then I'll put it up full and switch it on in a moment. So have a listen. Sorry, not the best example. We'll try this one. Now with punch on, off. So it's a subtle kind of a difference, but you can definitely feel that that extra emphasis for me in the lower end, just a little bit there. Now the other effect, which is much more obvious, is the space effect, which is essentially a delay effect. So let's have a listen to that, and I'll gradually turn it up so you hear more of it. Love that really huge effect. So as I say, you can download this for free now. I'll put a link in the description, and if you don't have the full version of Contact, you can still use these loops. So this next plugin that I have here is the Warmy EP1A Tube EQ from Keve Audio. Okay, now this is based upon some renowned hardware by Pultec, the EP1A. Now these EQs work in a very peculiar, unique way, if you like, which definitely takes some explaining. So I've decided to make this little plugin a good example for a little bit of education in the way Pultec EQs actually work. And I'll do my best to explain this because it's not that easy to explain. The easiest way to think about the controls we see here is in three different sections. These three down here, which deal with the low end. these next three here, which are going to be dealing with the higher end of our frequencies, and then these two which deal with the very high end. Okay, now they interact with each other in a very unusual way, which is worth trying to understand. First of all, let's start off down the low end. Okay, we can select a frequency here with this selection switch. We can't select anything in between, just the 5 or 6 or 7 selections we've got there. I think the original didn't have as many as that, but anyway, we'll choose 60 here, and then we can boost at 60 hertz. Okay, that's straightforward enough, isn't it? But we can also cut or attenuate here at 60 hertz as well. That may not make an awful lot of sense. How could you boost and cut at the same time? Indeed, legend has it that the original manual told you not to do this, that one will be counteracting the other. But some clever person at some stage figured out that these don't actually happen at exactly the same frequency. You may be boosting at around about 60, but when you actually do the cut, when you look at this and you analyze what's happening, it's actually happening a little bit above 60. Now, this turns out to be quite useful, because if you would do a big boost on the low end, let's do it to this drum kit at the moment. We'll just put it down to 0. We'll play the drums and then boost it. You can hear that big boomy boost that I'm getting there. Now think of this as, well, it's actually a shelf, but think of like this as almost like a bell curve. Okay, it's got a big area of influence. So as you boost, you're actually affecting more and more frequencies around that 60 hertz, and it may get a bit too boomy on you. Okay, but that's where this cut becomes useful, because it happens just a little bit above that. Then you can kind of control that curve a little bit and contain it to fewer frequencies, which is really, really handy for, as I say, controlling that boomy sound you may get. So I'll just start to add this cut in there. And you can hear I'm getting that really low end boost, but it's much more controlled when I push the cut up as well. So that's the low end of things there. Very interesting. Kind of what I'm going to say is a very musical way of doing EQ down at the lower end. Now, as we go up here to these frequencies, we've again got another frequency selector. Okay, here you can see the different frequencies right up in the high end there. Say I could choose 5 kilohertz, for example, here. Now you can see by the label it says boost high frequency. In other words, we only really have a boost control over this here. Okay, we can boost this frequency, and we've got a bandwidth control here, which I guess in simple terms we can say affects the kind of Q of that. Okay, so it makes it broader or more narrow. Okay, so we can affect those high frequencies by boosting them here. And then we have these two last controls, which is really like a very high shelf, if you like, which we can only cut. Okay, there's only a cut on this one, there's only a boost on this one. But the interesting thing is, when we look at the frequencies that we can select, there's going to be some crossover here. So if I had this set to 5 here, we can have this set to 5. They're both working around the same kind of area, so they're going to interact with each other. Okay, although they're different types of curves. So it's just an interesting kind of way of EQing. It's no good if you want to do something really sort of surgical. It's not for that. It's for a much more musical way of EQing an instrument. Now, the other interesting thing about this is we do have this bypass switch down here. Okay, remember, this is on the actual plugin. It's not the bypass switch in the DAW. Now, if we disengage this EQ, I've actually analyzed this to double check it. It is still adding some harmonics and some color to the actual sound, even when we're not using the EQ. Okay, and I believe that was also a characteristic of the original hardware, that the sound was still routed through the hardware, even in bypass. Okay, so that's just an interesting thing to know. Just out of the box, before you even start to EQ, it does add some nice sort of vintage color and all those other words, warmth, that we use with vintage stuff in general. Let's call them cliches, hey? Now, I do think I've saved the best until last, but before we dive in, I need to get something out of the way, okay? And I know it's going to make some of you groan, but if you do find yourself groaning, please hang in there with me, hear me out, because I really do think this is going to be worth your while, because this last plugin is free with any purchase at Plugin Boutique for the rest of this month. Now, as I say, hang in there. I know some of you are going to go, oh, it's not really free. You have to make a purchase. I know what you mean by that, but don't cut your nose off to spite your face, okay? If you follow the link in the description down below and you look at some of the deals at Plug-in Boutique at the moment, you can buy things for as little as a few dollars. I think like $5, $6 or $7, something like that. And then you're going to get this next plugin for free with that, which is normally valued at $59. And I think it's worth every penny of $59 anyway, okay? I think this is really valuable to you. So you're going to get that other plugin for a few dollars, or you can buy a more expensive one if you like, and then get this one for free. Let's dive in. What we're looking at is the Fat Channel XT from Presonus. As I say, free with any purchase at Plug-in Boutique for this month. This will be familiar to Studio One users, of course. However, this is actually being hosted at the moment in Cakewalk, and it can be used in many, many other DAWs if they use VSTs. Okay, I think there may be versions for Pro Tools and Logic as well. You'll have to check that out. But if you're using one of the many DAWs which use VSTs, then you can use this. So it's a channel strip which is comprised of 5 different main components. Okay, but there's a little bonus that I'm going to tell you about at the end with this. But let's go through the basic components. We have a high pass filter. We have a gate stroke expander here as well. We have a compressor, we have an equalizer, and we have a limiter. Now we can display them stacked like this, or we can show them on individual lines like this. I'm going to leave it with this view, and then I'm going to zoom in because it's much easier for you guys to see what's happening. So let's go through these different components. We have the high pass filter, which is off at the moment because it's turned all the way down, but if we start to push this up, we can select a frequency to start doing our high pass. No other controls with it apart from that, so very simple and quite useful, to be honest with you. I've used it quite often. Switch it off for the moment. Now the gate is something that I use in almost every single video that I make for you guys, and I'll be using it at the moment on this microphone. I find it very, very handy and straightforward to use, and it helps me to cut out any background noise that I'll be getting from like the kids arriving home from school or the postman knocking on the door, all of that good stuff that I have to contend with. Poor YouTuber, I know. So it's a really handy gate, and as I say, an expander as well. Moving on from there, we have a compressor, a really straightforward compressor, very familiar again to Studio One users. It's very similar to their stock compressor. Quite easy to use. You've just got your threshold here, you've got your ratio, you've got your attack, your release, a makeup gain, and a key filter as well. I won't go into the details here, but we're going to be coming back to the compressor because that's where one of the bonuses is, which I'm going to tell you about. Now moving on, we also have an equalizer here. Again, pretty straightforward, an attractive equalizer here. All of the kind of controls that you'd expect for a modern equalizer. You've got those 4 bands there which you can adjust the Q, all that good stuff, and you've also got a high and a low pass filter on there as well. Again, we'll be coming back to the equalizer because that's where one of the bonuses in this setup is as well. Now finally in the chain we have a limiter. That's just got one control there for the reduction that you want to, or the sort of threshold you want to set for your limiter there. Okay, so not complex to use. I do use it occasionally. I normally want something a bit more sophisticated, but if you want a straightforward limiter, very, very handy. So let's go back and talk about those bonuses that I was talking about with the compressor and the EQ. So if we go back to the compressor, we've got this standard compressor, as I say here, but we also get an additional 2 compressors. This is very transparent, but the next 2 that we're going to look at are based on some classic hardware which have their own sort of characteristics. Now, before I open up the menu and show you that, you're going to see a lot more than an extra 2. Let's do that. And that's because I have some extra sort of little units which I've purchased that work with the Fat Channel. Okay, but with this free version that I'm talking about, you'll get the standard one, which is the one that we looked at already. Then you'll get this tube, and you'll also get this FET version. So let's load up the tube compressor. You may recognize this as being modeled on the very famous LA2A, a very straightforward compressor to use in some ways because your main control is really this peak reduction, which starts to add the actual compression, and then we have an output gain here as well. It can be used as a limiter as well, which changes the ratio behind the scenes drastically. But this is very, very useful if you haven't used one of these at all in my opinion, on vocals, and I use it on acoustic guitar a lot as well. Very natural sounding. Unless you push it ridiculously, then it's very hard for you to hear that compression is involved. Now, the other type of compressor that we have here, again, this is called the FET, and this is based on another famous piece of hardware, the 1176. This is much more useful if you want to be more precise. You can get a very, very low attack on there, those kind of good stuff. And I'd suggest, this is much more useful on harder hitting things like, I don't know, drums, for example, very useful on that. So you're getting two classic compressors there, as well as that basic standard compressor. Likewise, when we move on to the equalizer, we do get this standard equalizer, but we get another couple of classic equalizers as well. Let's first of all move on to this one. This is a passive EQ, and you may recognize it because we were talking about something very similar to this earlier on when we were looking at the Pultec. Okay, this is a different version of that, but that's one of the ones that you get with this. And if we move on again, we go to this vintage EQ, which is based on a classic Neve EQ. I wish I could demonstrate all of these to you. There's just not enough time. I've used enough of your time already, but you do get an awful lot here with this Fat Channel XT. So consider following the link in the description down below to Plugin Boutique, where there's a whole heap of great deals. So what are your favorites of the plugins I've showed you today? Let me know in the comments down below. Also, let me know in the comments down below, of course, if you do want me to make more videos like this on a regular basis. I'd love to hear your opinions on that. And you can show your appreciation, of course, by hitting the like button as well. Now, follow the link in the description down below for my patreon.com, where for as little as $1 per month you can help me help you by making more videos like this, and I'll see you in the next video.